call the meeting to order of St. John Common Council Finance Committee. And the first item, we have item 2.1, which is the minutes of October 29th. So I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. I'll be able to turn my camera on here after I get to my next destination, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
no worries. Thank you. So we've got Councillor Radwin, Councillor Norton. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Okay, and item 3 is approval of the agenda, which was previously circulated. We don't have any additions, so I'll take a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Radwin and Councillor Norton, if that's all right with you two. On the motion, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded and carried. So item 4, disclosures of conflict of interest. Any conflicts of interest? Not seeing any, we'll carry on. And that takes us to item 6.1, the 2026 general fund operating budget. And for that, we will turn things over to CFO Fudge. CFO Fudge.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan, members of Finance Committee. At our last Finance Committee, I presented the proposed 2026 general operating budget. I asked the committee to receive and file that budget and to provide any further questions or feedback. I don't intend to provide another presentation again this afternoon. We do return today to ask the Finance Committee to endorse the draft budget and direct staff to send it to Common Council on November 17th. That would be a recommendation to be received and filed at Common Council on the 17th, with the intention of Council giving the final approval of the budget on December 1st. Just a quick recap from our last meeting. During the budget presentation, we highlighted the budget represents over $205 million in community spending, which is up 5.5% from 2025. And we recommended a property tax rate of $1.535, and that's a reduction of 1.5 cents, which would be during the term of this council, we have reduced the tax rate by 25 cents over the term of this council since 2022. Based on our scan of other municipalities for 2026, it appears most municipalities, are either maintaining or increasing their property tax rates due to the impact of the provincial property assessment freeze. However, as we discussed, St. John, due to our strong fiscal management and success in our debt management plan, we were able to offer a modest 1.5 cent reduction given the decrease in 2026 in our budgeted principal and interest payments on our debt from the fact that we've been making some progress in our debt management. We also discussed the importance of engagement at our last Finance Committee meeting and how this particular budget was shaped based on the feedback we received, not only from the community through the Shape Your Budget platform, but also, and by the way, we also think the Shape Your Budget platform was very close. We discussed this at our previous Finance Committee meetings. Very close, if not statistically accurate, based on the participation level and the success we had this year, but also how the 2026 draft general operating budget reflects the feedback of Common Council in areas such as housing for all, bylaw enforcement, tax rate reduction, the investment in roads and sidewalks, traffic calming, safety, and in quality of life and recreation. And we discussed how really have to look at the capital budget and the operating budget holistically in order to see that reflected in the budget. We also discussed the importance of fiscal reform, the impact that it's had already on our draft 2026 budget, and the importance of the provincial property tax reform efforts that will be undergone in 2026. So with that, we have our controller, Craig Levine, who's instrumental in putting the budget together. In attendance, we have our commissioners, we have our CAO, Mr. McGovern. Here in event, there are questions from the Finance Committee. And the recommendation this afternoon is for Finance Committee to endorse the 2026 general operating budget and to forward the budget for the next meeting of Common Council to be received and filed. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. I guess first I will check in with committee to see if there are any questions on the budget. Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Chair Sullivan, thank you. I just had one question just through you to CFO Fudge. Just wondering, Kevin, I mean, I know that, you know, we're hearing about it here and there within the departments, but does your group generally give any sort of guidance to each department on putting in contingencies for increases in like goods and services? Like, we already know that things have gone up from last year to this year, and of course COVID and all that sort of thing, and we're anticipating that things might go up again. It's really hard to understand. Is there any sort of guidance that you would normally give to each department, or do you think, like, I'm just kind of wanting to kind of get an idea. I know each department may have an idea of increases that are already coming because they might be seeing the cost of things going up, but just wondering if you're giving any kind of guidance on that.
Yeah, and I'll ask our controller to speak more specifically about it. But yeah, we tend to give guidance, obviously, in wages and benefits, which is, you know, the majority, 50, 60% of the budget. There's guidance with respect to collective agreements and rates that are in that. We provide guidance in terms of what we will embed into the budget for goods and services when it comes to CPI for goods and services, or if there's specific expectations on, you know, increases such as electricity, power, those sort of things. So there is, through our general operating budget process, we do provide that guidance, and often if it's not either embedded in it by the service areas, it's provided by the finance department as part of the budget. We put that in and we advise our service areas of what those inflation factors are, so that they're aware. But Mr. Levine, if you want to jump in and chime in, provide any more detail to that process.
No, thank you, CFO Fudge. I think you've covered everything. I will just add from a fleet perspective, and you'll see that in the year-end projections, and that's something we did talk about the last time we brought some year-to-date results. That's provided by the fleet department. Again, there can be timing differences as what we've seen this year. So anything new that we've received in 2025 will be built in the 2026 budget. But if something does arrive in 2026 from a fleet perspective, that can throw some numbers up. But as CFO Fudge stated, we do, build a lot of these things in as best we know the time.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. It just gives me a good idea. I figured that you probably did. And I know some departments would just know because they would see rates going up for different pieces of equipment and things that they would order for their office. But it's really hard to know. And like, I know even as an entrepreneur, like all of a sudden we'll sometimes get a list of increases and you think that things are going to go up a little bit. But like, for example, just to throw that out there, like on the news the other night, I saw that they're expecting maybe chicken to go up between 20 and 25%. So like, that's not something that I would have anticipated being that high. So it's hard to know sometimes when you're trying to manage these things. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Norton, just checking in to see if you have any questions on the budget.
No questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. The only question I have, Kevin, and you're right, we don't need the presentation because we had it the last meeting. Are there any significant changes that people might note between when we saw this a couple of weeks ago and now?
No significant changes. We did incorporate, reallocated some funds for the fact that 2026 is an election year, and there will be a need to onboard the new council, orientation. We need to do that properly and make sure it's a good investment up front to make sure that the new council is equipped and understanding our strategies and our plans and all those things that they're going to be overseeing with respect to policy. So we did reallocate within the budget, but it did not add to the overall budget. So there's no, other than that, there's no significant changes that's been made since the last time the Finance Committee's seen this.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll take a motion on the recommendation to recommend the operating budget to council for their first official look and a receive and file at council. So Councillor Radwin, yeah, thank you, and Councillor Norton. Councillor Norton, I'll put you down to second that.
You got it.
On the question, all in favor signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, and carried. Thank you. And that takes us to 6.2. 6.2 is the utility fund operating budget. And for the utility fund operating budget, that goes over to Mr. Fogan. Mr. Fogan?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so through you to the committee, very similar presentation, I guess, or lack of presentation, if you want to say it, as Commissioner Fudge had just given us. But you saw the draft utility budget last time we presented it. And this time we're looking for a recommendation to refer this to council for approval. Just another summary of this budget is basically as steady as she goes, is the way I'd characterize it. We are following the long-term plan, which there is incorporating a small rate increase of $1.50 a month, a little over 1% on potable rates. Other than that, there's a couple of significant projects that we've outlined in our long-term plan as well that will enable us to further plan the capital expenditures for the next decade, including the water master plan and also the universal metering. With that, if there are any significant questions or any questions at all, I guess, related to this item or the next, both Kendall Mason, the Director of Water, and I are both available to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Fogan. Checking in with committee. Any questions on the water operating budget? No, and I'll ask you the same question, Mr. Fogan, that I asked CFO Fudge. You had mentioned no significant changes from when we saw this last to now. Yeah, I see the nod.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you. And for those who may not have tuned in last time, so we're seeing $1.50 a month on potable water. And there's always a discussion, usually in social media somewhere, about commercial water. Those rates get set based on the cost recovery. So
correct.
They can ebb and flow based on previous usage, but at the end of the day, they pay what it takes to recover the cost for the water that they use. Okay, so on that, just bouncing to my recommendation here. Recommended that Finance Committee endorse the proposed 2026 utility fund operating budget and forward the budget to Common Council for receive and file. So I'll take a motion on that with Councillor Radwin and Councillor Norton. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Takes us to 6.3, our September 2025 year-to-date and year-end financial projections. And for that, we go to our controller, Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan and members of the Finance Committee. I'm happy to present the September 2025 year-to-date results along with our year-end financial projections. Our focus for this presentation will actually be on the financial year-end projections. So this slide is just a high-level overview of the general fund. At this point, we are projecting a minor surplus of just over $585,000. This slide breaks down our revenue by service area, and we are showing a projected surplus of just over $9.68 million. So this highlights a few of the big ticket items. So the city has continued to benefit from a higher interest rates than we anticipated when we set the budget. As most members of council are aware of, the 2025 is a record year in the city in terms of our building permits issued, which is resulting in very positive building permit revenue for this year. Housing for All and Rapid Housing is grant revenue that the city received, and this is really just an in and out. It's just covered the cost of the expenditures for these two programs, as well as the majority of the variance in our reserve transfer is related to the road resurfacing programs. These funds were actually carried over from prior year due to delays in the program, and you'll see that offset when we get into the expenditures in public works. This slide provides a breakdown of expenditures between our wages and our goods and services. And as you can see, we do have a surplus again this year in our wages. Again, staffing side of business continues to be a challenge in some areas. So the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some of the significant variances in each of these service areas, starting with our growth and community services. As noted, the variance can be misleading. The Rapid Housing Initiative grants are just over 3 million, which is offset, as I just referred to, by the grant revenue, so it's an in and out. Along with our Housing for All variance, this is also offset by grant revenue to cover the cost of the program. So when we take those out, the overall variance for growth and community services is very minimal. Next is our Public Works and Transportation Services. Highlighted on the slide is expenditure variance that is offset by transfers from reserves and other sources of funding. Our road resurfacing is offset by $1.65 million in reserve funding, but we are also expected to receive an additional $400,000 from the province as part of our road resurfacing program. There is also a $200,000 transfer from reserves to cover the cost that was incurred for the new recreation facility, along with recoveries expected due to offset the cost of encampment cleanups, as well as the costs associated with the utility cut program. After these offsets are accounted for, the variance is projected to be just over $2.6 million. And we have spoken about this a few times as we brought financial figures forward earlier this year. We had a very difficult snow removal season early in 2025. And along with the cost of our fleet renewal as it's coming in for equipment and various vehicles. Other variances that we anticipate that were unanticipated during the year was the rail crossing at K Park. The cost of line paint was up much higher than expected. Some of the replacement of our equipment was much higher. Again, lastly, tipping fees are much higher than anticipated. And again, fleet parts, again, that's been continued year over year. So hopefully we'll catch up sooner than later. And lastly, the subsidy for transit is expected to be just over $50,000. And that's a great news story when you kind of look at the last couple of years where fuel and insurance and a few of the other items were significantly over budget. So very good news from the transit front. St. John Fire, the projected deficit is largely due to continued increases in the equipment gear, along with just general increases in the fleet parts. Our utilities and infrastructure has a small variance projected. Really, the positive variance in our wages offsets the variance in goods and services. Strategic services anticipated to have a surplus of just over $800,000. Finance, less professional service than we budgeted for. And IT is under budget, largely due to the timing of some of the projects and as well as receipt of goods that won't happen probably until 2026. And then corporate services, the majority of the positive variance is within the wages. And again, just generally just minor variances within the other service areas. Other charges is anticipated to have a $1.29 million unfavorable variance. The overage and transfer from capital reserves relates to sale of equipment and insurance. So we have the revenue comes in and this is just the offset to move it into our reserves, as well as other expenses relates to various litigation matters. So next I'll go through St. John Water. For the overall year-end projection, we are actually anticipating an overall deficit of just over $4.6 million for 2025. First, revenue is projected to show a shortfall of just over $1 million. Meter is the big driver of this variance. St. John Water anticipates about a $600,000 loss from one particular potable customer, large industrial customer that receives potable water. This was a result of the drought where we couldn't shift water over to that customer. We are supplying water to that customer now, but it is at a reduced volume. And then the balance of the deficit is just really consumption related. Consumption's down lower than we anticipated for this year in our metered customers. Overall, on the expense side, we anticipate a $3.6 million deficit in their expenditures. This slide just shows you that both wages and goods and services are projected both to be over budget for 2025. St. John Water faced three major events that were outside the normal operating expenses this year. In June 2025, there were several water transmission failures that occurred. This resulted in some additional costs. Between June and July, and this program is still ongoing, a specialty contractor was engaged to perform a condition assessment at our Eastern wastewater plant. This assessment resulted in immediate repair and operational work under the guidance of safety professionals and wastewater treatment experts to ensure that the facility met regulatory requirements and the approvals to operate. Lastly, due to drought conditions experienced this year, staff had to also advance the design of an emergency pumping, obtain regulatory approvals, and prepare to engage contractors and suppliers if emergency pumping was required. These events also are the driver of the salaries being over budget due to some of the additional overtime incurred. So in conclusion, for the general fund, a large portion of the variance in revenue expenditures relate to the cost of recovery of programs such as Housing for All, the Housing Accelerating Fund, and as well as transfer from reserve. The city has a record year in building permits, and staff will continue their diligence for the balance of the fiscal year. For St. John Water, it has been a very extremely challenging year. The annual operating budget just does not have the flexibility to absorb such large unanticipated expenditures as we've seen in 2025. And staff will be recommending to transfer up to $4 million from the Utility Reserve Fund to fund this deficit. A final reserve report will be brought to the Finance Committee in early December before going to Common Council before the end of the year for approval. And just as a highlight, we wanted to include a slide that shows where we are with the current reserve balance for potable reserves. And this slide shows the anticipated $4 million to fund the deficit. And with that, the recommendation will be that Finance Committee approve the transfer of up to $4 million from the utility reserves and to receive and file this presentation and direct any questions for staff.
Thank you, Controller Levine. Turning it over to committee members for questions or comments. Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Hi, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, I do have a few questions. One is on, I know it's a lower amount, but it was mentioned that there was encampment revenue brought in about to clean encampments, $178,000, and then later on it mentions that there's a fee for encampment cleanup and illegal dumping. But I was just really curious because I've had a lot of illegal dumping in my ward, in particular. Just wondering, do you know how much of that would be mostly for illegal dumping? And I thought that the province was covering all of the encampment cleanup, so I'm curious about that too.
I'll refer that over to Commissioner Udaltz.
Yes, through you, Chair, to Councillor Radwin. I mean, it's a good question. That amount, I don't have a specific breakdown in front of me right now, but we do typically through the year, every year, experience a fair bit of illegal dumping in various areas of the city. So that does add to our tipping fee costs, especially now that the tipping fee rates have been going up recently. And with respect to encampment cleanups, we've incurred a fair bit of expenses engaging contractors to do those cleanups. And there are areas, in particular around the interchanges, that are provincial property. So we are seeking reimbursement from the province for those. Okay.
The other question that I had for you, actually, Commissioner Huguenot, is I know that you have a lot of fairly new staff that are part of Local 18. Is there a good chunk of funds allocated for training?
We do have money in all our budgets to support training, and that is one of the things actually that we're talking about with respect to the initiatives plan for 2026. Is looking at specifically the needs for training. There's a good tie-in there with some of the efforts that are underway to modernize our safety program, and that's going to definitely be part of that. But, you know, for example, we do training as part of our day-to-day work. Certainly going into the winter season, we would have gotten together multiple times to enable conversations with the supervisors, designated supervisors about our needs for the winter service. And we even did, you know, we made the shift change earlier than normal this year, specifically to enable some of that training for the newer employees on our route. So they would be on our day shift for a couple extra weeks to enable them to get more comfortable with those routes. So training is certainly something that we always look at, in particular this year.
Okay, no, that's great. Chair, I do have questions on water too. Do you want me to hold off and wait?
Yeah, actually, why don't we do those separately? Councillor Norton, do you have any questions on the operating projections for this year? I'll take that as a no. Okay, I do have one actually, Mr. Hugenholtz, really just following up on your comments on tipping fees. And just slight concern I want to inquire, like we've had very good response with diversion the past couple of years with our bring in, our separation of refuse, and I'm hoping that the program is still going well. Are any of the tipping fees related to a need for us to re-educate the public on separation of their garbage or anything like that? Or are these really the increase in overage related to other things?
That's a good question, Chair Sullivan. I would say most of the increase that we've been seeing is from two factors. Number one, the increasing tipping fee rates that we're paying at the landfill. We've kind of held the line on our tipping fee amount in our budget the last 2 years, I think, and we're starting to see that kind of get disconnected with what our actual costs are that are incurred. The other factor is the growth that we've experienced here in the city over the past number of years. That is adding pressure to our tipping fee lines, and we're going to sit back, take a deeper dive in that over the next few months. We have adjusted. We're going to be adjusting in the next budget cycle. I think any discrepancy there is pretty manageable, and I don't think it's attributable to any kind of decline in recycling efforts, because certainly residents have a fixed amount that they can put in those carts, after which they have to purchase the bag tag. So there's a built-in incentive there to encourage that waste diversion.
No, thank you for that, and that's good news. And just for residents and maybe committee members can remind me on Monday night, just to remind residents, keep diverting as much as you can, because it's real dollars that we save. The more we can do, and that makes a lot of sense as we grow and we add more housing, which we want, and bring in more people, which we want. It's going to create more garbage, and so the more we can divert, the better. Thank you for that, Mr. Hugenholtz. That's very helpful. Okay, so that, unless somebody from committee has any more questions on our current state and projections for the operating budget, we will move things over to water. So, Councillor Radwin, I know you have some questions on water, so go ahead.
I did. Thank you to you, through you to Commissioner Fogan. I was just wondering how do you usually estimate what your metered accounts are going to bring in for revenue? And I'm just kind of wondering, so when they're in a deficit, it comes out of the operating reserve, but do they have their own operating reserve that it's coming from, or does it have to basically be paid back to the general operating reserve? How does that work?
So I can give you some answers on the estimates, but Craig can probably weigh in on just how the reserves factor in a little better than I can. But yeah, it's all based on consumption, on past consumption. We assume past consumption is going to continue, and we look for revenues to recover the amount of operating costs.
Sure, makes sense.
Craig, on reserves.
Yeah, so in reserves, these are all potable customers, whether they're metered customers or they're flat rate customers. We only have two separate classes of customers. As you know, we have our industrial raw water customers, and the rest are potable. So all potable users share in that as they do with the cost of the service. So this deficit majority of it will come out of the potable reserves, because it is a potable issue.
Oh, that's great. And Chair, I mean, it's a good news story, really, looking at the budget, seeing how much revenue came in, growth department, and emergency services, even looks like it's gone up. I can't recall what it was in the Ernst & Young report. I think that they had wanted the city to find revenues of 10% more. I think this would have certainly exceeded that, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I looked at that, but it looks really great to see so much growth in revenues in those departments. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, the only piece I would add, certainly when we have a $4 million shortfall in a budget, it's concerning. But I had enough conversations and prior to the meeting conversations with staff to understand it. When we do charge for metered water on many of our accounts, and then due to the climate, we tell everybody to conserve water. It is right for the environment and our supply, but it also tells people not to use as much, which reduces the revenue that gets involved. And then on top of that, we have the other pieces with just pipe fixes and all those things that come up. So never good to have a $4 million shortfall. But when Mr. Fogan mentioned that, within our annual budget, we certainly don't plan for a $4 million contingency, but the contingency is our reserves. And it goes back to having a sound financial plan with reserves so that when you have these things come up, yep, it's not great, but we plan for it. We have our rainy day fund, literally. And so we absorb it, we fix things, and we move on. And, I think Mr. Fogan has mentioned, planning for next year a slight increase, and certainly Mr. Hugenholtz mentioned it. You learn from in the tipping fees, and it's putting pressure. So as we continue to budget for next year, we plan for that, we move ahead. So again, continuing to follow our sound financial plan. Yep, it happened, but we were ready for it, and we move forward. So I think and Mr. Levine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the recommendation on this is a receive and file, as I push buttons to try to find it again.
Yeah, that's correct on the presentation, and endorsing the up to $4 million transfer to the from the utility fund operating reserves to the operating budget.
Thanks. Yeah, I did find it. So it's a receive and file on the information, and Finance Committee. We have to recommend this approval to council. That's proper wording, yes?
That's correct. And as I referred to earlier, we will be back to Finance Committee early December with a final reserve report once we have all our numbers in for all the different reserves. So, we'll formally recommend it at that point. So
okay, good. So at this point in time, Finance Committee recommends the approval of the allocation of reserve funding of up to $4 million from utility fund reserves to the 2025 utility fund operating budget for emergency expenditures at the Eastern Wastewater Treatment Facility and the emergency pumping at Loch Lomond drinking water supply. But that will all come into the formal report, as Controller Levine stated, for the recommendation to council at a subsequent Finance Committee meeting. Did I get that right? Oh, good. Okay. So on that, we'll take the motion. We've got Councillor Radwan and Councillor Norton. You're fine moving and seconding that. So all in favor can signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
And contrary minded, carried. CFO Fudge, just a quick check-in. Was there anything else?
No, that concludes the agenda.
We're only 35 minutes. That can't be. Okay, I'll take it. So some big news, because the general fund operating budget is going to council now with 1.5 cent recommendation and all sorts of bits and pieces that have come out of council's roundtable and Shape Your City utility fund budget moving ahead responsibly, and some good news on the year-end projections, knock wood, on the operating budget side with a small surplus and important conversation about the projection on the utility side and use of reserve funds to make sure that that's still coming out copacetic. So with that, I will take a motion. Well, I need to thank staff and committee for being here and putting in the hard work. Incredibly important that I do that, and I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Radwin and Councillor Norton. So with that, thanks very much, folks. Finance Committee meeting for today.